Yeah. Guten Abend, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren.
A very warm welcome.
Herzlich willkommen zur Buchpremiere von Arundhati Roy.
A very warm welcome to this event of the International Literature Festival Berlin.
Mein Name ist Carla Meder, ich bin hier Dramaturgin am Deutschen Theater und ich darf Sie ganz herzlich im Namen unserer Intendantin und natürlich des gesamten Teams vom Deutschen Theater begrüßen.
And I'm Simone Schröder, the ILB's Head of Program, and I also greet you from our Festival Director, Lavinia Frey, who sadly can't be with us tonight.
Ja, das Deutsche Theater ist nicht nur das älteste Sprechtheater in Berlin, sondern es ist auch eins, was seit 150 Jahren, seit Beginn seiner Existenz, sich eigentlich den zeitgenössischen Autorinnen und Autoren immer sehr verpflichtet gefühlt hat. Und tatsächlich ist es heute so, dass ein ganz großer Teil, eigentlich der Großteil unseres Repertoires aus zeitgenössischen Autorinnen und Autoren besteht. Tatsächlich begrüßen wir sehr viele von unseren Theaterautorinnen und Autoren hier auf der Bühne zu den Premieren. Und ab und zu haben wir auch Buchpremieren und dank dieser wunderbaren Zusammenarbeit mit dem Internationalen Literaturfestival begrüßen wir ab und zu auch sehr prominente Autorinnen und Autoren aus dem Ausland bei uns. Das heißt, es ist eine wunderbare Zusammenarbeit. Vor einem Jahr zum Beispiel war auf dieser Bühne Salman Rushdie zu Gast, zur gleichen Gelegenheit eigentlich.
Absolutely. And we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of our festival this year, and tonight's event is the final highlight of it all, I may say. In September, we held a wonderful series of readings and conversations at Haus der Berliner Festspiele with a special anniversary program. Many of the events were sold out. There were long queues at the book signing tables and happy authors and audiences everywhere. I'm sure some of you were there. And yet we felt this is not enough. It wouldn't be a true anniversary without Arundhati Roy. Arundhati has a long and close connection to our festival. She gave the opening speech in 2009 and last appeared with us in 2017. We are therefore especially thrilled to present tonight the German premiere of her new memoir, Mother Mary Comes to Me, recently published by S. Fischer Verlag. My warm thanks go to Oliver Vogel, publishing director at S. Fischer, who is with us tonight, and to his team for what has been a wonderful collaboration.
Ja, die Veranstaltung heute Abend, die wird live gestreamt und simultan auch aus dem Englischen übersetzt ins Deutsche. Wer kein Englisch spricht und noch keine Kopfhörer hat, aber welche braucht, der kann sie sich jetzt gerne noch holen. Direkt neben dem Haupteingang ist der Stand. Fühlen Sie sich frei, jetzt den Saal zu verlassen und sich schnell noch Kopfhörer zu holen. In diesem Zusammenhang Dank auch an die beiden Dolmetscherinnen Tuesday Bumbry und Milena Adam, die hinter der Bühne ihre Arbeit machen werden. Das Buch von Arundhati Roy wurde ins Deutsche übersetzt von Annette Grube und die Passagen, die wir später hören werden, sind auf Englisch und auf Deutsch. Auf Deutsch dann gelesen von Eva Maria Salcher aus der Übersetzung. Eva Maria Salcher ist seit 2 Spielzeiten hier bei uns am Theater Ensemble Mitglied. Und sie ist Schauspielerin und in vielen, vielen Stücken hier auf der Bühne zu sehen. Ich glaube, es sind insgesamt 7 oder 8 im Moment. Sehr viel Zeitgenössisches auch, also Reinhard Götz Baracke zum Beispiel oder Georges Perec, die Gehaltserhöhung, die kahle Sängerin von UNESCO. Im Moment probt sie gerade Eine Minute der Menschheit nach einer Novelle von Stanislav Lem.
And tonight's event will be moderated by Priya Basil. Priya is a Berlin-based author and curator and a long-time friend of our festival. Her latest book, Locked In and Out, explores questions of memory, culture and belonging in Germany. Priya is, among many other roles, a co-founder and board member of Wir machen das, an NGO that works with refugees and migrants for a more inclusive society. Since 2021, she's also the curator of the ongoing literary intervention Objects Talk Back at the Humboldt Forum. She has collaborated with the Wellcome Trust as international writer in residence for 2 projects to research different cultural understandings of mental health. And she's currently a fellow of the Center for Advanced Study in Heritage and Transformation based at the Humboldt Universität zu Berlin. We are so delighted to have her with us. And I would also like to mention that Priya has served on our selection committee for our Curator in Residence program in the years 2024 and 25. And in connection with this, I have some exciting news to share.
Das war der Test.
After this year's festival, our new committee met and has selected writer G. Tile as Curator in Residence for the 26th ILB. You may know him as the author of the novel Narcopolis, published in German by S. Fischer. To close this anniversary year with an author from India feels fitting because tonight's conversation will begin a dialogue that we will most likely continue next September when Jeet curates events that will bring new voices from South Asia to Berlin. There's so much to look forward to. So before we begin, I would like to thank our funders and partners. This evening is only possible thanks to first and foremost the Hauptstadt Kulturfonds, the ILB's main funder, and the Lotto Foundation Berlin for supporting this book presentation as part of our 25th anniversary program, Ein Vierteljahrhundert Weltliteratur. We are also grateful to be here on stage at Deutsches Theater Berlin. So thank you, Carla, to you and your team.
Very welcome. Wir haben noch eine Ansage. Nach der Veranstaltung findet eine Signierstunde statt. Im Foyer können Sie Bücher erwerben von Arundhati Roy. Vielen Dank an den Buchladen Langer und Blomqvist, die das organisiert haben. Und Arundhati Roy wird dann dort im Foyer auch signieren. Das ist im Spiegelfoyer gleich, wenn Sie hier rauskommen, bevor es dann links auf die Straße geht.
And now we wish us all a wonderful evening and a beautiful premiere with Arundhati Roy.
Thanks for being here.
Wow, such a warm welcome.
Thank you for that.
Good evening, everyone who's here in the room and also everybody who's joining through the live stream. It's very special to be gathered here this evening with Arundhati Roy. In The God of Small Things, the grown-up Rahel arrives one evening at Ayamanan Temple for Kathakali, the classical Indian dance theatre of Kerala, to find the performance has started. Arundhati Roy writes, "It didn't matter that the story had begun, because Kathakali discovered long ago that the secret of the great stories is that they have no secrets. The great stories are the ones you have heard and want to hear again, the ones you can enter anywhere and inhabit comfortably. They don't deceive you with thrills and trick endings. They don't surprise you with the unforeseen. You know how they end, yet you listen as though you don't. In the way that although you know that one day you will die, you live as though you won't. In the great stories, you know who lives, who dies, who finds love, who doesn't, and yet you want to know again. That is their mystery and their magic." We are gathered here this evening with the knowledge that Mrs. Roy has died and her daughter has survived to tell the tale of their tumultuous relationship. Yet we wait, full of anticipation, to hear the story of Mother Mary Comes to Me, even if we have already read the book. Many of us feel we know Mrs. Roy from versions of her, perhaps less formidable, if no less painful, in our lives. We know hints of her from Amu in The God of Small Things. We know Mrs. Roy in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, from the darkest and most enterprising sides of Anjum, from a harrowing hospital scene between Tilomata and her mum, the Queen Mother in Kerala. Perhaps we have also glimpsed elements of Mrs. Roy in the broader machinations of power that Arundhati Roy has so carefully chronicled in her award-winning fiction and non-fiction. I believe that the accumulation of vast, unfettered power by a state or a country, a corporation or an institution, or even an individual, spouse, friend, or sibling, regardless of ideology, results in excesses, Arundhati wrote in an essay titled Come September. We are gathered here because we wish to share the secret that isn't a secret. Mother Mary Comes to Me makes piercingly manifest the great story running through all Arundhati Roy's writing, a great story of how to keep loving when loving could destroy you. How? Arundhati Roy's work shows us, not with self-effacement and denial, but with courage and compassion, with wisdom and humor, when necessary, with distance, tenacity, ferocity, where possible, with tenderness, with wonder, with others. I left my mother not because I didn't love her, but to be able to continue to love her, Arundhati Roy writes in Mother Mary Comes to Me. In the great stories, we know that sooner or later, mothers also always have to leave, a final exit. To live, to love as though they won't, Arundhati Roy suggests, can't change the story, but it can change you. Arundhati, thank you for this amazing, heart-bursting book. And in this book, you went back to Mrs. Roy as never before. And I guess the question that I'd love to begin with is what impelled you to go back and hang out so intimately with this extraordinary visionary, but kind of impossible to be near, Mrs. Roy?
Well, actually, I did leave her when I was 18 years old. For about 7 years, I had no connection. But after that, there was a relationship from which I never really went away, because I had to continuously measure the distance that I needed to keep in order to not let her destroy me. But I didn't want to sever that relationship, because even through a lot of pain and a lot of devastation, not just between me and her, but between her and my brother, and watching things around me, I always knew that she was also magnificent, So when I became an adult very quickly, and I began to look at her as an adult looks at another, without any expectations of the safety or protection or love that should come from a mother. But as I became somebody in my own rights that had my own array of weapons, when I was with her, I always laid them down. I never used them. I never wanted to defeat her. I always wanted her to go out like a queen. And to do that, it took a lot out of me, but I don't regret it, and this book is really Some people keep asking me, by the way, Germans, please don't ever call me Mrs. Roy, because it really freaks me out, because she ran a school and I was a little child in her school and I had to call her Mrs. Roy because that's what the other children called her and I was not to be shown any special treatment. So Mrs. Roy, and in the book I refer to her as Mrs. Roy, which is a very separate person from me. But she, it was always an adult looking at another adult, and I think both with my mother and my father, when I was very young, and I left, and I was on my own, and putting myself through college and all that on my own, and so I stopped looking at them as parents. I stopped having any expectations of them as parents. And I think that's what allowed this relationship to survive, with a fair amount of humor and all of that. But so I felt that when she passed away, I was devastated, because to maintain that relationship with the sort of force that could be quite destructive, which involved, as I said, keeping that distance and yet not going away. Often I misjudged that distance and I would get mauled and stripped down, and then I'd have to kind of reconstruct myself. But I felt that, I wanted to share this woman with the world, because that kind of unleashing of yourself, of herself, which she did, not just the good and great parts of her, but the darkness and every aspect of her, was a kind of freedom which women just didn't practice, So there's a part in the book where, after 7 years of estrangement, I meet up with her when I'm about 25, and she's in Delhi to challenge the Christian the Succession Act, the inheritance law, which for this small community of Christian women in Kerala to which she belonged, the inheritance law virtually said that women were not allowed to inherit any property. And she challenged it, and the Supreme Court struck it down. But when she was sort of lobbying for this, she had come to Delhi, and that's how we met up. I was by then, a graduate from the School of Architecture, and I went with her to meet a slightly older lady who was also a part of this community. And my mother was sort of explaining to her why she was challenging this law. And this woman just said, Mrs. Roy, I don't know why. What will we do with these rights that you want us to have? And why are you destroying our beautiful community? So I said, I wanted to sweep all her mementos off her table and say, hey, listen, do you know who you just met? I mean, she's not just fighting for the right to equal inheritance, she's fighting for the right not to be a nice woman, and for the right not to be a perfect mother, but most of all, for the right not to be a fucking bore like you. So this was that thing all the time with me. I myself would get harmed by her, but I could still see what she was. And writing this book was somehow because I believed that she belongs in the pages of literature.
Yeah, I mean, that generosity, it's there, even in the dedications of Ministry of Utmost Happiness, you call her an extraordinary human being. So you can see that it's not that it's suddenly there, that, as you say, it was practiced over years.
Of course, the title in German is different, but in English, Mother Mary Comes to Me, as I'm sure many of you will know, is from a Beatles song which says, Let It Be. And the dedication here, of course, is to my brother first. I said, that we together we made it to the shore, but then it says, for Mary Roy, who never said, let it be. She just never let anything be. And I'd just like to read you two paragraphs from the first chapter, which will give you some idea of, what I mean. So the first chapter is called Gangster. And I'm just going to read the end of this first chapter, which says, in my effort to fathom my mother, to see things from her perspective, to accommodate her, to understand what hurt her, what made her do the things she did, and to predict what she may or may not do next, I turned into a maze, a labyrinth of pathways that zigzag underground and surface in strange places, hoping to gain a vantage point for a perspective other than my own. Seeing her through lenses that were not entirely colored by my own experience of her made me value her for the woman she was. It made me a writer, a novelist, because that's what novelists are, labyrinths. And now this labyrinth must make sense of its labyrinthine self without her. To bridge the chasm between the legacy of love she left for those whose lives she touched, and the thorns she set down for me, like little floaters in my bloodstream, fish hooks that still catch on soft tissue as my blood makes its way to and from my heart, is why I write this book. It is as hard to write as it is not to. Perhaps even more than a daughter mourning the passing of her mother, I mourn her as a writer who has lost her most enthralling subject. In these pages, my mother, my gangster, shall live. She was my shelter and my storm, which is, of course, the title in German of the book.
There's a remark that one of her drivers makes at one point. It's only this crazy lady style of Mrs. Roy's that will work in this Kottayam of ours. And so what was this crazy lady style, and what was she up against? Because she managed to start this incredible school, which is still going and is like hugely successful. But yeah, give us a sense of this crazy lady style.
Well, so basically, my mother married my father, who was not a part of the Syrian Christian community, and she divorced him when I was about 3 and my brother was 4.5, and left the tea estate up in the northeast of India in Assam, where he was working as a tea planter, and came back down south. She was very ill. She had very, very severe asthma, which is a very terrifying disease for a child to watch their mother, struggling to breathe and so on. And she eventually, moved from this little town where we first arrived in without my father to Kerala. And there she started a school, which was in the rented premises of the Rotary Club of Kottayam, which was the little town. We were living in Aymanam, and we used to go every day by bus to this town and to this little club where the men would meet and smoke and drink and leave all their shit around, and we would kind of sweep it up and clean it up and then put tables out, and that used to be our school. There was only 7 of us, including my brother and me. But very quickly, it became very, very successful, and it started to go from nursery to 1 to 2 to 3, the classes, and then she rented a house next door, and she started a hostel to take in boarders. And this town is a very, very conservative place where, the idea of girls and boys studying together and all this was just a scandal. And she was determined that was what was going to happen. So every day it would be a new battle of something or the other. And I tell you a funny part where when the classes went up to class 6, class 7, the girls started growing up and, wearing bras, and the boys started behaving like boys behaved in that town, making fun of the girls and the bra and so on. So Mrs. Roy called an assembly. Then she sent 2 of the boys to her cupboard to fetch her bra, which was quite large. So they came with a bra to the assembly, and she said, okay, so now this is a bra. This is what it's for. Your mothers and your wives and your sisters and everybody will be using them. and if it excites you so much, please keep mine. So that sort of completely changed the pH balance, between the boys and the girls. And then there were like many battles that were fought, one after another. That's quite separate from the legal battle about the inheritance law. So I never lived, because of the school, all my life, I never lived in a house or a home. It was always some classroom or some sick room or some whatever space, wherever you could find, that I grew up in this very, very public way. And there was a lot of terror also while, because of the asthma attacks, and she would keep telling me that I'm going to die, and what are you going to do, and you'll be on the street, and who's going to look after you, and it was all a little frightening. So obviously when I was a child, I just used to think, well, if she dies, I'd have to find a way of dying too, right? But as I grew up, that sort of changed a little. By the time I was 16, I was plotting and planning my escape from that town, and I went to Delhi by train, which was 3 days and 2 nights away, to study architecture. And as soon as I entered the filthy, stoned, bizarre campus of the School of Architecture in Delhi, the minute I entered it, I was like, okay, I don't have to die if she does. And my lungs were breathing only for me. Earlier, I used to be like trying to breathe for her, when she was ill. And she sort of understood that flag of independence had been raised, even if it had not been declared. And it created a fair amount of hostility. And so I was in Delhi studying architecture, and I would go back by train to this Fellini-esque school, like a sort of city of women place, And there's a part in the book where I arrived by train, and she sends this kind of Jehovah's Witness person to pick me up at the railway station and I know that something is wrong. And that something was that, she had realized that I had a boyfriend, and that was really not acceptable. So this Jehovah's Witness, Ammal was her name, she used to speak in this biblical Malayalam, and she'd be hitting her chest and saying, it's only because she loves you. And meanwhile, I've just gone into rock and roll and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and I can't stand all this stuff. So Amal is at the little Kottayam railway station, hitting her chest and telling me it's only because she loves you, but she doesn't want to see you. She doesn't want to set eyes on you. You got to live in the sick room. Your food will be sent to you. You're not to appear before her. And in my head, I'm going like, yeah, okay. And then I just developed this persona which had nothing to do with anybody in the town or in my culture or anything. And after second year, it really started to get violent and hostile, and a lot of insults and abuse. And then many teenagers, maybe 10 years too late and many continents apart, I sort of listened to She's Leaving Home on a loop, and then I just left. And I never went back for many years.
Maybe we can hear a passage now where maybe the seeds of this departure were planted when you went to when you discovered Laurie Baker's architecture, and yeah, we also get a bit more of a sense of Mrs. Roy in action.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a chapter. This is a chapter called Joe, Jimmy, Janice, and Jesus. So I was still in high school at this point, and I had, the relationship between us was really rough. And my mother's school was doing very well in its rented premises. So she decided to she raised a little bit of money and bought a little piece of land outside of the town. And then she was looking for an architect to build for her. This land was very steep and, very difficult to build on. And she found an architect called Laurie Baker, who lived in a town much further south, like a 5-hour drive from where we were. But he was an amazing architect. I mean, that's the reason I started to do architecture, because he called himself a no-cost architect, and he used to build the most incredibly beautiful buildings with nothing, for nothing almost, So this chapter has me and her and one of her minions fanning her with a peacock feather fan in the school bus, like driving all the way down to Trivandrum to meet Laurie Baker, who we met. And then he said, why don't you go around Trivandrum and look at some of my buildings and see what you like, and I'll, have a young assistant of mine take you around. So we went to meet this young assistant who was a third-year student who had dropped out of college for a while, and he was working with Baker. And I just introduced him a little. He said the young assistant threaded his way through the little heaps of building material on the site. I couldn't believe it. He was Jesus. He was rock and roll, and he had walked on water all the way from Woodstock to Kerala to meet me. I was 15 and he was nearly 19, and for the first time in my life, I understood what sexual desire was. My brain, my heart, my soul all parked themselves in my groin. He had long, lank Jesus hair, a Jesus beard, and a lean, flat, easy-walking Jesus body. Brown Jesus, I mean, not the geographically relocated, genetically modified blonde one. Apart from a black sarong, he was bare-bodied and barefoot. As he came up to the van, he casually stubbed out the bidi he was smoking on the calloused heel of his foot. I died. I wasn't sure how Mrs. Roy would react. She surprised me by greeting him warmly, as though he was just another young person, and as though he was wearing clothes. When he got in, she introduced me to him. He said hello. I said hello. Although he had walked all the way from Woodstock to meet me, I didn't want to meet him. Not like that. Not in my mother's school van. Not in my stupid clothes. Not with her around. So I disappeared into the back seat of the van. I became the back seat of the van. We drove around from Baker Building to Baker Building. Though Jesus wasn't a Malayali and spoke no Malayalam, he managed to communicate with the workers on site. He explained the cost-saving techniques to Mrs. Roy. He showed her how bricks were laid in what Baker called a rat trap bond, with an air gap in between. He demonstrated how a filler slab was cast, and he showed us a range of brick jalis, which is a way of, building walls with ventilation. He had a calm, intelligent, gentle way of speaking. I died some more, if that was even possible. Mrs. Roy was fascinated and attentive, drinking in every detail, flashing her beautiful dimples at him. He was Daddy's proud son. Daddy was what the Masons used to call Baker. So he was Daddy's proud son, showing off his father's accomplishments to Mummy. I trailed them, carrying the bag with her inhaler and medical paraphernalia. I had never seen her so animated. There was no sign of asthma. Joe Cocker and Jimi Hendrix trailed me, falling about laughing. They made me feel small and hopeless. Janis Joplin played the opening chords of Piece of My Heart and then gave up and went away. She just wasn't the Trivandrum type. She needed a different canvas. By late afternoon, we dropped Jesus back at the site we had picked him up from. My body was exhausted by all its new feelings, and we started driving home. Once we reached the outskirts of the town, Mrs. Roy turned on me. Congratulations. That boy must have thought you were a genius. By the way, this is the boy that later became my boyfriend. Now, she's angry with me because I didn't talk to him, and then later it was because I talked too much. Anyway, congratulations. That boy must have thought you were a genius. I didn't respond. You couldn't think of a single intelligent thing to say? The air in the van began to thicken with that familiar feeling of deepening dread. The cold moth on my heart flitted between the seats. Mrs. Roy was about to embark on a rampage. She started in a quiet, reasonable tone, which always signaled grave danger. Do you think it's nice for me to have people thinking that my daughter is a complete fool? I sincerely wanted to reply, but I couldn't. I had stepped through a portal and caught a glimpse of another world. I had learned a new language and couldn't use old words anymore. Answer me! The school driver's head twisted around like an alarmed owl's. I couldn't think of a single thing to say, intelligent or not. She asked him to pull up on the side of the road. Get out. I got out. I was so used to getting out. Get out of my house, get out of my car, get out of my life every other day. She drove away, still being fanned by the peacock feather fan. Picture me, valiant organ child, freshly sexually awakened, completely dazed, dressed like a frothy fairy, perched pathetically on a milestone on the side of the Kottayam-Trivandrum highway. I had no plans other than to sit on that milestone for the rest of my life. Years later, when I met my father for the first time, I learned that kicking me out of the car was something of a sport for them. He told me, laughing, that the first time it happened, we were driving on a jungle road from the tea estate we lived on in Naugong to Shillong. I was just under 3 years old. Being annoying on long drives is obviously a talent I was born with. It was almost dark by the time Mrs. Roy circled back in the van. Get in. We drove the 5 hours back to Kottayam in dead silence. I couldn't tell who had won, her or me. Me, probably.
That Laurie Baker architecture is really stunning. So if you have time to go and look at the school website, it's so beautiful. It really took my breath away. And this completely changed the course of your life as you had imagined it until then, Arundhati. So you said that you realized that architecture could evoke the same joy in you as music and literature, and this was then what led you to make the decision to go to Delhi.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier in this book, it was that, and it was also, baser things, like I needed to meet that Jesus guy. Like, I had to get there somehow.
Jesus came to you as well, not just Mother Mary.
And then I also knew that, by then I knew that I had to get away from home. I just was going to get destroyed if I stayed. And I knew that if you got into the School of Architecture, you could literally start working when, even when you were in the first year, like you could work as a draftsman or whatever. So it was a fascination with Baker and his architecture, but it was also a whole lot of other things that, and then of course, this was the contradiction of her. I was just from this little town, a girl like me at that point of time could not have really dreamt of, going and studying architecture, but she said, like, you can do whatever you want to do, So she actually did help me to get there, to take the exam and all of, I went alone, but she encouraged me, and I got in. And by the time I was in second year, I was already working, earning, and absolutely reckless human being, so I just stopped going home. I was just like, I'll manage somehow, but I'm not coming back.
That time in Delhi was also a very tough time. It was amazing in terms of the kind of friendships and just this thesis you ended up working on, but you said also that you were absolutely alone in the world then, with almost no money, and that India was going through its biggest political crisis since independence at the same time, and so that seems to have been quite a different existence in Delhi for you. Being sort of so. Like having to deal with these existential things, and therefore the political, you just couldn't, kind of pay attention to it. It was a very different kind of existence.
Well, first of all, for someone from Kerala to go to Delhi, it's like maybe at that point even stranger than someone from India coming to Germany now, because it was a different language, different culture, different food, different scale of thinking. So I ended up landed there when I was 16 and left home. Just stopped going home when I was 18. So, but when I first landed in Delhi, just kind of surviving it and just getting my own bearings was, I didn't even know what was happening. It was the emergency, civil rights had been suspended and all of this. But I was just so focused on, right there, like how do I survive from one day to the next day to the next day. So it took me a while actually to look up and to figure out what was going on around me and to understand it. It did take a while, and by the time I understood, the emergency was over, and but by then I was also somebody who had my eyes around my head. Studying architecture really taught me to look at the world the way I look at it now. Even by the time I was in third year, I started becoming more interested in city planning. I already knew I wasn't going to be an architect building things for rich people. I was already so interested in, how the city comes to be what it is, who counts as a citizen, who doesn't, who the laws are for, who the spaces are for, who the spaces are not for. So that part of me was really forming in the School of Architecture.
Yeah. And before we go on, I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned earlier that your mother was Mrs. Roy was part of the Syrian Christian community. And what did that mean for your negotiating a kind of place in India where you described as this iron grid of caste, ethnicity, and religion? What was the meaning of how did that identity play a role in how you navigated?
So the Syrian Christians are a very small minority in Kerala, but they are a very elite minority. They are the people who own the pepper and the coffee and the tea estates and so on. They're a very closed community. And like everybody in India, whether you're Muslim or Sikh or Christian, you do end up practicing caste, So in a way, that's what the God of Small Things is about. But what it meant for me was that I was not fully Syrian Christian because my mother had married outside and then divorced. We really didn't know who our father was. And it was made very clear to me that the reassurances and the privileges of this community were not for me. So while I didn't in any way grow up at the bottom of the caste system, I was on the edge of everything in the sense that I just didn't fit in anywhere, So that, in retrospect, could be a good place for a writer. But certainly, even now, let's say, every time I write something, one of the continuing themes in the Hindu right wing is, she's not a Hindu. I'm like, did I say I was? I'm to write a book called Mother Mary Comes to Me, and your response is like, she's not a Hindu. Like, hell yeah, So, but there's that whole thing in India now about Hindu nationalism and how Hindus are the first citizens, and of course, wrapped into all of that is the politics of caste, So, but interestingly, when I came to Delhi first, I was so fed up of being disowned by this Syrian Christian community that I dropped my first name, which is Susanna. My whole name is Susanna Arundhati Roy, and I dropped that, because of being, okay, I've had enough of that. And then you come here and they're like, oh, she's not a Hindu, oh, she's not a communist, oh, she's not whatever, So it's in that sort of quicksand of identity where India, everyone looks at India as, everyone in the West, or a lot of people in the West look at India as a anarchic space of Bollywood and yoga and Gandhi, and that's all crap, The only anarchy is in the traffic. The rest of it is as rigid as it comes. More than 90% or more people marry within their caste, within their community, within their ethnicity. It's a very, very, very hierarchical, rigid system,
I heard in an interview you mentioned that you and your brother used to refer to yourselves as children of no ancestral address.
No, not me and my brother, but my mother used to tell us that people in the community would refer to us in Malayalam as address illatta pillare, which means those children without an address.
Okay.
Because we didn't have patriarchal, we didn't have the ancestral home and the family name and all that. So that's what we would be called.
Okay, because I just wanted to connect that to a different kind of, let's say, ancestral connection, which I think is really core to your work, which is to the land and the river and this environment that you grew up in that was so formative for you. And I think has really shaped your sensibility as a writer and person. And I wondered if you would speak a bit about that particular part of your childhood.
Well, when we left and came back to Kerala, that's the territory of the god of small things, of course, this little village called Imanam, which is where I spent my early childhood. And it was, again, very interesting, because we had my mother, of course, she was divorced and came back. My mother's older brother, who's a major character in this book called G. Isaac, he was married to a Swedish architect, actually, and then divorced and came back. There was all these cosmopolitan people who had been defeated by life and were living in this village. My uncle was a Rhodes Scholar who had given it all up to return to Kerala to start a pickle factory with his mother. And because he was a Marxist, he organized his own labor against himself. And it was all absolutely eccentric people, And they spent so much time quarreling with each other, making up, humiliating each other. I was, even the cook in the house would be like, how shameful is it that we have these fatherless children living here and so on. So I just spent all my time outside on the river. I knew every fish, every insect, every worm, every tiny creature, And I grew up in this place in those formative years with obviously no shop, no restaurant, no cinema hall, no toys, just nature, right? If you wanted a toy, you had to make it yourself with seeds and, the strip of a palm leaf and all of this. I spent hours on the river bank with a fishing rod that I had made myself out of a culm of bamboo, catching the tiniest fish that could ever be caught, but then frying them, eating them. So it was a childhood of such privilege in a way, because you just, we were also just not indoctrinated because nobody could be bothered and people were fighting so much. So it was also that. So I had the run of this wilderness, and to be very young and to be able to think your own thoughts is a privilege that children today just don't have, because everyone's just constantly something coming from your iPad or your iPhone or your, televised children's storyteller or whatever it is, whereas we had to invent our lives, invent our childhoods too, And I don't think of that as anything terrible, even though there were some terrible things happening, but I think of it as a privilege now, you know.
Yeah, no, it's such a gift. I mean, it's interesting because now in the kind of language of, Western thinking about these things, you talk about more than human or other sentient beings, and these are like present in your work from the very start.
In all my work, I mean, it's never just about human beings, you know, and even later on when I started writing about the rivers and the dams and the forests and the mining and all of that, it just came directly from this landscape that I loved and know.
Yeah. Maybe this would be a good moment now to hear another reading from Eva Maria Salke from the German translation.
Als Kind konnte ich nicht anders, als sie zu lieben. Irrational, bedingungslos und furchtlos, wie alle Kinder es tun. Als Erwachsene versuchte ich sie kühl, rational und aus sicherer Distanz zu lieben und scheiterte oft, manchmal kläglich. Versionen von ihr fanden Eingang in meine Bücher, aber sie nie. Ihr gefielen diese Versionen und sie identifizierte sich mit Ammu in Der Gott der kleinen Dinge und sprach über sie als ich und mich. Sie wollte Ammu sein, weil sie sehr wohl wusste, dass sie es nicht war. Als ein verschmitzter Journalist sie fragte, ob sie tatsächlich wie Ammu im Buch eine tragische Liebesaffäre gehabt hatte, blickte sie ihm in die Augen und sagte, warum? Bin ich etwa nicht sexy genug? Sie war damals schon in ihren 60ern, eine selbst erschaffene Diva. Sie konnte sagen, was sie wollte. Als das Buch erschien, sorgte sie sich um die Geheimnisse, die es womöglich preisgab. Um auf Nummer sicher zu gehen, wies sie sich ins Krankenhaus ein. Dort las sie es hastig und war höchst erleichtert, dass nichts enthüllt wurde. Anfänglich behauptete sie, das Theater um den Roman nicht zu begreifen. Dann las sie es genau. Nachdem sie es 3 oder 4 Mal gelesen hatte, sie war jetzt wieder zu Hause, rief sie mich an ihr Bett. Es war ein schöner Nachmittag und das Licht, das durch die Vorhänge schimmerte, war bordellrot. Ihre Augen waren geschlossen. Sie sagte, sie halte es für ein gutes Buch, gut geschrieben. Sie fragte nach einer bestimmten Passage, in der sich Ammus 7-jährige Zwillinge Esthappen und Rahel an einen Streit ihrer Eltern erinnern. Wie die Eltern groß wie Riesen wurden, die Kinder zwischen sich hin und her stießen und sagten, du nimmst sie, ich will sie nicht. Wer hat dir das erzählt? Du warst zu jung, um dich daran zu erinnern. Es ist erfunden. Nein, ist es nicht. Und dann drehte sie sich zur Wand. Ich habe nie das Gewicht oder den Kummer dieser Erinnerung gespürt. Ich glaubte wirklich, dass ich es erfunden hätte. An diesem Tag lernte ich, dass die meisten von uns eine lebende, atmende Brühe aus Erinnerung und Fantasie sind und nicht die besten Schiedsrichter darüber, was das eine oder was das andere ist. Also lesen Sie dieses Buch, als wäre es ein Roman. Es will nichts Größeres sein, doch andererseits kann es nichts Größeres geben. Literatur ist dieses seltsame, rauchartige Ding, das nicht allein den Autoren gehört, auch wenn sie es glauben. Woher kommt es? Aus unserer Vergangenheit, unserer Gegenwart, unserer Lektüre, unserer Fantasie? Ja. Aber vielleicht auch aus Ahnungen von unserer Zukunft? Wie sonst ist es möglich, dass auch ich mich jetzt, wie Figuren in meinem 2. Roman, das Ministerium des äußersten Glücks, um ein Grab in einem Gästehaus kümmern muss? Es ist haarsträubend. Es hält mich nachts wach. Doch dann frage ich mich, warum sollten wir alles wissen?
Arundhati, you invite us to read this book as though it were a novel. and thinking about your work. I mean, I also, in preparation for this event, I had it was like a gift to have time to read your work kind of in proximity. Often it's like spread out over years. And when you do that, you also get a different feeling for a writer's work. And I thought of something that the writer Madeleine Tien, she published a book this year called The Book of Records. And she's speaking about that and the endeavor of literature. She said, I feel as though we are all writing one big book. And reading your work, I felt as though it is all one big book. And there's something that I found absolutely astonishing, which struck me just in this reading, which is that you do something very particular with structure and time. You tell the story before you tell the story. And without ever losing the narrative tension. It's like you prepare us, and yet you leave us with the sense that anything could happen. And it's as though Esther's wisdom from the God of small things is very quietly woven through every single one of your texts, fiction and nonfiction. And of course, his words come up in Mother Mary Comes to Me, and you also close with them. A, anything can happen, and B, it's best to be prepared. And it's a very beautiful experience to be held in this kind of storytelling. It feels like a great act of care and love towards the reader, towards the text, and maybe also towards the writer yourself. And I wondered if you would speak about this form of storytelling that you have developed and what its meaning is for you.
Well, that's such a beautiful way of putting it. I have to say that one of the ways in which I managed to survive what life threw at me when I was young was to be a writer in my head, So I said, one half of me as a child was taking the hits and the other half was taking notes. And there was this sort of hunt for a language, and by that I don't mean Hindi or German or Malayalam or Urdu or anything. I mean that language that a writer controls and a writer speaks to herself with, the language that keeps me sane, a language that keeps blood flowing in my body. And there's a passage here, right, where I say that I knew that language was a beast, like a striped and spotted thing grazing somewhere, waiting for me, the predator, to come and to kill it, to eat it, and to drink its inky blood. And then so it was this carnivorous, hunt for language. And then there is structure and the way you tell a story. And I think, it's interesting that you began with the idea of Kathakali. This Kathakali in Malayalam means, the storytelling, the play of storytelling. And it is a form of dance where they are telling the stories of these epics, and yet they've kind of marinated themselves in the epic. So you can just tell a small part of it, really detailed, just a woman looking at herself in the mirror and getting ready, or then you can leap through time in the epic. You're so familiar with it that you're like an athletic person, And to me, I always felt that was a great influence on me, that how do you get so familiar with what you want to tell that, first of all, there's no heavy breathing, there's no display of, look at me, I'm so cool, I can do cartwheels, but you can do cartwheels, and you somehow communicate to the reader almost like you would to a lover. I think when I started to write The God of Small Things, that was to me, I was living in Delhi. Nobody who I knew and who I lived with knew anything about my past, about Kerala or anything. So writing The God of Small Things was like writing to a loved one, saying, look, this is how it was, this is what it was. And I always said that, there are writers who you read and they leave you with the memory of their brilliance. And there are writers who you read who leave you with the memory of the world they have created. And I wanted to be that writer that gave the reader that gift of, it's also architectural, right? Let me give you this city, or let me give you this building, and just walk around in it. You don't have to walk around, enter at the beginning and end at the end, It's the atmosphere, it's everything. And so structuring something mattered as much as the language, as much as the story. And then lastly, it was like somewhere the decision to live the life of a writer, which means not producing 95 books, but living in such a way that everything that you write is related to everything that you write, is related to everything that you write. So for me, Mother, when I say read this as you would a novel, it is, people ask me, is it a memoir, is it a novel, I said it's whatever you want it to be, but it is a memoir of a novelist in which the characters, whether they are fiction, the real characters become fictional, real people become fictional, fictional people become real. There's no separation in it, they're all mingled and they're all part of this world of the writer's life where imagination and memory and reality are mixed up, but there is an ethics to it. It's not that it's just an unethical mix. It's an ethical mix, but it is definitely an endeavor on my part that, like in The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, one of the main characters, Anjum, she kind of lives in a graveyard outside of Delhi, and then she slowly starts building a guest house where every room encloses a grave. And then it gave me a lot of peace. It gives me a lot of peace to think that, oh gosh, when I die, I'll be there in that guest house in a graveyard. And all the characters that I write about, real or not real, I don't know, for me they're all real, will be there with me, So, yeah, that is also the care I give myself, that I'm creating an afterlife for myself.
Well, I hope many of us can join you there, because I think these characters
It's like once I was speaking in the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre, and I came out of there and someone asked me to sign some petition, and it had 3 columns, a name, address or something, and organization. So since I didn't have an organization, I wrote SIN, SIN, and underneath I said Sweethearts International Network. So some people thought that was a real one. I said, anyone who wants to can be part of it.
You found this beautiful language for the God of Small Things, but then you also have found a language for your nonfiction writing. And what's sort of so strong and just so galvanizing in that is that all these years of writing, you've always taken a really clear position without telling a single story, in the sense that John Berger puts it, that never again will a single story be told as though it's the only one. And it feels like such an incredible thing to have this clear position, but to always have it inflected by multiple voices and viewpoints, because those things don't always come in combination. And it feels like even more vital in this political time to have that clarity with the kaleidoscope of, of realities that accompany it.
It's interesting, I was speaking to someone last week, I think it was, and he said that, this book, Mother Mary Comes to Me, it's so accepting of people's imperfections, and it's non-judgmental at a time when people are being so judgmental about each other and all of this. So I said, it's not that I'm not a non-judgmental person, you know, but I feel like the world is turned inside out, you know, where we ought to be judgmental, in my opinion, for instance, about Gaza and the genocide that's happening there. Everyone is like, oh, let's just, you know, not be judgmental. And where you ought not to be judgmental about some little personal foible or error or mistaken judgment, then we are very judgmental, you know? So to me, it's important to be judgmental when you have to be, you know, and it's important to take everything in account and yet then take a position, which is something that I do in my political work, you know, and it's not that I'm not aware of the nuances or the arguments on both sides, you know. It does not come from a position of ignorance. Like a lot of times earlier, not so much now, but earlier, I used to be, you know, continuously lectured by men in India, what I can write, what I can't write. Oh, you know, she's so angry, she's so passionately, they used to denounce me for being passionate. I'm like, why are you so suspicious of feelings? I mean, these are not feelings that come from ignorance. These are feelings that arise from knowing the facts, you know? So I think it's important to be judgmental and to be clear sometimes. And I think it's important to be extremely ambiguous and forgiving sometimes, like I am with Mrs. Roy. You know?
No, well, thank you for that, really. And I think that what you said about writing as being a kind of also, and language as a form of kind of regulating your nervous system, because not to speak also is a really kind of, like, you feel so unwell, like not to be able to say what reality is like a horrible feeling.
I mean, unfortunately, you know, all of us recognize, I mean, India for a while, we've been heading into this space where you can't say what you feel. I mean, if you live in a place like Kashmir, you're not even allowed to think, I think, you know. Before you've thought it, you've committed a crime. So it's a terrifying reality that a lot of people do have to live with. And even for me, I mean, anything I do or say, as you can see in this book, every move I make, 5 male lawyers file a criminal charge against me, you know, and it started 20 years ago. It goes on. I mean, until 3 days ago, there was a case against me for displaying intellectual arrogance by smoking on the cover of this book. I mean, those are the minor ones, then there are the major ones and all of that. But the point is, are you going to I mean, how do you carry on in such a situation? Because it's like there are tripwires everywhere, and sometimes they're meant to like incarcerate you, or which they have. Many of my friends are in jail, many are dead, and then to interrupt your way of thinking, to just do that all the time, and the answer to that is not to be some teenage rebel and talk stupidly, but to negotiate it, and to be an adult, and to refuse to put yourself in a prison of silence, because that prison that you build for yourself is much worse than the one they want to put you in, So how do you negotiate these realities and continue to do real work is a test for us today, for all of us.
I mean, one way that you have used, the success and also the financial success that's come to you from the God of Small Things and the work that followed, is that you've set up a trust to support work that would otherwise be difficult to be done in some of the political regimes, and I mean in India in particular. And that seems like finding other ways to kind of navigate these realities?
It's true that, like we spoke about in the beginning, I spent my early life only thinking about money, how to survive from one day to the next to the next. I had no ambitions, none. It was just a survival game. And afterwards, of course, there was a period where I was working in cinema, writing screenplays, production. Still, there was no money. But when I wrote The God of Small Things, I felt like I had just broken the pipeline that distributes the world's wealth to the world's wealthy people. I was just like spewing money at me. I really didn't know how to think about. I'm not talking about movie star or film star or rock star or anything like that, but just by my own standards, more money than I needed or wanted or worked for or anything. And then, the books, just the royalties that keep building up. And although I have written in quite detail, particularly in a little book called Capitalism, A Ghost Story, about trusts and NGOs and foundations and how this network of finance is so, it's really a form of furthering capitalism and privatizing policy and all that. So I don't believe in that kind of charity is real charity. Nevertheless, I had this money, and I have this money, so we decided to...
God, you're rich.
So I have a friend, actually, from architecture school called Golak, he's a painter and a complete nut job. And when he had a note from me, all of us were completely broke together, and he has a note from me when I was in third year or something saying, "Dear Golak, I'm completely broke. Can you give me like 2,000 rupees? When I'm rich, I'll give you lots." So when I got the contract signed for The God of Small Things, his response was, "Hey, Roy, thank God we're rich." So it's like, so now we have a trust which some of us run, and it's just, the whole idea of it is solidarity, and we just give it very carefully. It's not like throwing money at people to feel good about ourselves or anything, but how do you just help people over that ledge, to do what they want, whether it's a documentary film or whether it's a fact-finding mission or whether it's a little news portal or whatever. But it's done very carefully, and it has to be done carefully because of, the situation in India today. But the point is that there is something liberating in being able to say, I have too much, let's share it, and let's all do some work that these foundations and NGOs and finance and applications and all the rest of it won't fund, because their job is to take the edge off things. Their job is to appear to be liberal and then sandpaper the radical edge of things. So whatever we can help, we help, But yeah, the motto of the trust is, thank God we are rich.
It was also this money that enabled you to do the work of going into the Narmada Valley. You said you paid for that with Bukha money, and then going into the forest with the comrades. So you're also kind of living exactly that you are.
It doesn't, you don't need money to go into the Narmada Valley or into the forests where I spent a few weeks and wrote this piece called Walking with the Comrades about this guerrilla war that's happening in central India, and the lands of indigenous people being signed over to mining companies. The same old story. Or it's not about needing money to go into any of these places. First of all, to enter any space, whether it's the Narmada, whether it's the forest, whether it's Kashmir, you need to be trusted, and that trust comes from the writing, not from money, The money is only, it's only that it gives me a kind of independence that I would not have otherwise had, and therefore I cannot be taken down that easily. But of course I can be taken down, and I'm constantly being taken down because it's a deadly waltz between being well-known, that saves you, but then it also harms you because you become a person that if they can take you down, then it's a lesson to everybody, you know. So it's a dance, and for me, one of the reasons that I love being here, and I'm in other countries with my work, is the only protection I have is my readers, you know, and is this bond of literature that people value and share, and it's an intimate bond, and it's a real bond. It's not come out of some, foundation or some artificial thing. And it's somehow that very fragile protection that is built between writers and readers. It's a little shelter that can be taken down, then we build it again, then taken down, then you build it again. So it's like that, you know.
Yeah.
But when I say that I live the life of a writer, I mean all of it, you know, all of it. Not just the writing, not just the books, not just but how do you live this life for real, you know?
Yeah, I always thought it was very beautiful that the indigenous people in the Narmada Valley said that they knew you would be against dams because of the god of small things and the way you wrote about it.
There was one of the activists, she...
I think we should have one more reading in German. Maybe we could go to the Kashmir section.
I think it's the one.
Pradeep hatte die Arbeit an einem Buch begonnen.
Sorry, not that one.
Oh,
yeah.
Kashmir. So we jumped to the third
skipping
reading.
that.
Okay, sorry. Selbst die beiläufigsten Gespräche mit Leuten in Kaschmir verursachten mir Kopfschmerzen. Der einzige Schild der Kaschmiri-Muslime gegen die systematische Grausamkeit der sie Regierenden schienen der Trost der Religion und der Schutz ihres engen Familienverbandes zu sein. Die Sicherheitsbehörden behandelten muslimische Kaschmiri-Familien oft, als wären ihre Mitglieder austauschbar. Ein Bruder konnte für einen anderen verhaftet oder umgebracht werden. Ein Vater konnte gefoltert werden, bis er seinen Sohn denunzierte. Eine ganze Familie konnte auf vielfältige Weise bestraft werden für das, was eins ihrer Mitglieder getan oder nicht getan hatte. Alles Leid in Kaschmir wurde entlang eines Gitterwerks aus Familienbeziehungen ertragen, aufgezeichnet, erinnert, quantifiziert, berechnet und bewertet, sowohl von den Tätern als auch von den Opfern. Für mich, die ich eine andere Fahne hochhielt, waren die Intensität der familiären Liebe und der ungezügelte Schmerz, der von dieser Liebe rührte, beunruhigend. Ich ängstigte mich, dass die ungewöhnliche Weise, wie ich liebte und lebte, zu prekär, zu fragil war, um wirklicher Feindseligkeit standzuhalten. Obwohl ich wusste, dass ich zu weit aufs Meer hinausgesegelt war und nicht mehr umkehren konnte, stellte ich mich, meine Entscheidungen, die Abwendung von meiner Zuflucht, mein Verhalten in Frage. Ich sprach darüber mit einer meiner besten Freundinnen, Shuhini. Sie war die einzige Person, von der ich glaubte, dass sie verstehen würde, was ich meinte. Sie lächelte und nahm mich in den Arm. Ich bin queer und du bist quicked. In Kaschmir war Quicket eine private Konfliktzone, die durch eine öffentliche Konfliktzone reiste. Und sie fragte sich, wie queere und Quicket-Menschen in Kaschmir lebten. Wer gab ihnen Obdach? Wer trauerte um sie? Wer betete für sie? Wer akzeptierte ihren ungewöhnlichen Schmerz? Jemand tat es bestimmt. Eine Reise durch Kaschmir bedeutete für einen indischen Bürger, der auch nur den Anschein eines Gewissens hat, sich heimatlos zu fühlen. Denn nach einer Begegnung mit Kaschmir kann man nicht zu alten Gesprächen, alten Witzen, harmlosen Spaß zurückkehren. Das vorsätzliche, kultivierte, unmoralische Unschuldsgebaren der meisten Inder hinsichtlich dessen, was dort geschieht, was dort in ihrem Namen getan wird, ist nur schwer zu ertragen. Nahezu ohne, dass ich es bemerkte, veränderte sich der Kreis meiner engen Freunde. Ich veränderte mich. Mein Humor veränderte sich. Er wurde etwas mehr Kashmiri, desolater und dunkler. Ein Kashmiri-Journalist fragte mich, ob ich ein Buch über Kaschmir schreiben würde. Ich sagte, dass ich mir nie erlauben würde, ein Buch darüber zu schreiben, doch dass Kaschmir in allen Büchern, die ich noch schrieb, vorkommen würde. Denn in diesem ätherisch schönen Tal wurden die Seelen aller auf allen Seiten des Konflikts auch zu meiner Seele, die sich gleichzeitig bildete wie zersetzte. Es gab keine Unschuld. Dieser Seelenkram zog mich ins Tal. Es machte mein Schreiben zu einem Spiel mit hohem Einsatz, zu einem riskanten Walzer auf einem verminten Tanzboden. Zu meinem Glück hatte Mrs. Roy eine erstaunlich erfrischende Meinung zu Kashmir. Sie war nie dort gewesen. Sie wusste so viel oder so wenig wie die meisten Inder. Sie war mit derselben Propaganda gefüttert worden, aber sie glaubte sie nicht. Wenn sie uns dort nicht wollen, warum zwingen wir uns ihnen dann auf? Das ist so vulgär.
I think it's really nice that Mrs. Roy has the last word. Just to finish, Arundhati, I wanted to ask you, we didn't talk about your dad, but I wonder if in a way he was also part of the path to softening towards Mrs. Roy, meeting him and he's the opposite of her in many ways. Like it's always so lively and funny and sort of light, even though it's not, they're different, there's different shadows there. And maybe you could finish with saying a bit about him. And you were saying your brother said that you're actually your father's daughter, even if we all think of you as Mrs. Roy.
I first met him when I was about 25. In fact, just a few weeks after I re-met her in Delhi, my brother, who he had gone in search of my father, who's called Mickey Roy. He was like, if it's not our mother, it must be our father, somebody must love us. And I was like, no, I don't think so. But anyway, I hadn't actually been in touch with my brother for 7 years. There was no email, there was no phone. He didn't know where I was. I didn't know where I was. I was like all over the place. And he found me in a magazine, actually, because I had just acted in this movie called Masi Saab, and he saw a picture of me, and then he contacted the production house, who contacted Pradeep, the director of the film, and he said, I'm Arundhati's brother, and how I can get in touch with her. So Pradeep said, well, she doesn't have a phone, but if she comes here, you leave a number, and I'll tell her to call you. So I got the number, and I went to a sweet shop in Delhi, and I called the number. It turned out to be a number of one of these really filthy hotels near the railway station, where all the hippies live and all. And my brother came on the phone, and he was sounding so excited. I hadn't spoken to him for 7 years. And he says, guess who's with me? And I said, Mickey. Baba. I said, Baba. He said, and my dad came on the phone, and I was just like, I don't want to speak to you on the phone. I was really flustered, I spent the whole night thinking, my God, I said, okay, I'll come and see you the next day. And I spent the whole night looking at myself thinking, who am I going to meet tomorrow? Which is very unlike me. I was so shallowly interested in his looks. And I had this picture of him as a young man, quite a handsome guy. And then my brother came to pick me up, and we went into this hotel, and, well, there's a whole chapter in the book about this absolutely bizarre meeting where I looked at him, and he had, been in Mother Teresa's home for the dying destitute, and he was like he was a destroyed human being. One eye was blind. Someone had bitten off half of his ear. But he was very cheerful, very happy. And the first minute I saw him, I was like, I just felt so shocked by how he looked, and it just can't be, and I was then I got a bit ashamed of being ashamed, and then I said, but just think how much worse would you have felt if he was some cigar-smoking CEO. Like, this is okay. For me, it sort of matches myself, it's okay. And so I met him, and the first thing he said to me was, so, do you still use bad language? I said, I beg your pardon, the last time you saw me, I was like 2 years old. He said, yeah, but you were a very foul-mouthed little girl, So I said, what do you mean? He said, I sort of accidentally brushed my cigarette against you, and you looked at me and said, chutia, which means asshole. So I was like, okay. But, I don't know, that sounds kind of appropriate, if you go around burning babies with your cigarette. And then we just had this, I think it's, to me, it's like one of the most interesting parts in the book. And all I can say is by the end of all this charming stuff, my brother was thrilled, and, everything was, it was just absolutely peculiar. But as happens with addicts, by the time he left, I had no money except like bus fare or something. He had taken that. And my brother's money and gone. He's like, bye. And that was our relationship for a long time. At that time I didn't have any money, but later on, I did, when I had money, I was looking after him, but I learned very quickly how to look after an addict. It doesn't involve giving that person money, but looking after him in other ways. But, it's okay, I'm laughing because I didn't have any expectations, I didn't expect this would be some kind of Bollywood meeting of father and daughter and all that. I just didn't believe in any of it anymore. My brother sort of tried it, but I was like, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not the family type. I'll find some other way of sailing, but not this. So, but yeah, he was it was very interesting for me because I didn't know him, he didn't know me, but he expressed affection to me in a way that my mother never managed to, which was always touching, and it took me a long time to not fall for that charm and give him money so that he would be drunk again and I would to find him somewhere. I once had to... a cousin of mine called me and said, he's disappeared. Like, if we don't find him, he's going to die, And so I went to where he lived with his sister on the outskirts of Delhi, and she and I walked through the whole neighborhood asking the cabbies, the cobblers, the cigarette sellers, have you seen him? Have you seen him? And all of them, their faces would just light up. They just loved him because he was writing their letters, making their applications, whatever. Finally, I found him in a building site, living with another drunk auto rickshaw driver in a tin shack, and quite cheerful. He said, look, we are both brothers, and we're going to live in Bengal. And I had to literally con him, put him in a car, take him to hospital. Then I took him to a rehab in Madras. And then after, a while, I went to pick him up. Oh, goodness, his room, the coke addicts, the drug addicts, the alcoholics, the cough mixture addicts, the nurses, the doctors, everyone was in his room. Like, they all loved him, and they were really angry with me, like, why are you taking him away? So that was him. And he was, he wasn't somebody that I spent a lot of time with, but in my mind, he was something in my life, yeah.
Yeah, like somehow even like that you held on to all these family members through everything.
And he was by India standards, the worst type of anti-national because he only loved the Australian cricket team. So maybe my anti-nationalism also came from there. I was like, he would have been jailed today for his love for the Australian cricket team. He would have gone into jail happily and told the jailer, come on, get a TV and let's watch the match, Like, what the hell? So that's, a lot of the men in this book are so beautiful. My mother had a very bitter experience with men, her husband, her father. But the men even the men that she had a bitter experience with, I grew to love. Like my uncle G. Isaac, I'll end with this, my continuing romance with failure, all the political writing and all the stuff I do, I know. We just get hit, we go down, we come up. But G. Isaac, who was the other side of the court case, of women's inheritance. So I was in Kerala after my mother won the case, and my uncle, G. Isaac, the Rhodes Scholar, pickle baron, failure of high proportions, had also failed in the case. So this filmmaker from Delhi had come to make a documentary about them. And, he came with this big city attitude, let's go patronize these small town hicks, He had no idea what he was sailing into. So I went with him to the pickle factory to interview my uncle. So the camera was set up, and Isaac was in his chair, and, the frame was ready. And Rashid Talib, the filmmaker, he said, so tell me, Mr. Isaac, as a leader of the Syrian Christian community, what are your views on the Travancore Christian Succession Act? So he looked into the camera for a time, then he scratched some horrible patch of skin disease or something. Then he said, Mr. Talib, we Syrian Christians are a very argumentative and complicated community. We have the Syrian Catholics, we have the Syrian Protestants, we have the Canaanites, we have the Jacobites, we have the Mar Thoma, we have the Pentecostals. We all have separate churches. We never agree with each other about anything. But if you question them closely, you find there is one thing that they all agree about. And that is that G. Isaac is not a leader of the community. So, that was it.
Yeah, we have him and you, Arundhati, to thank for the wisdom that making friends with defeat is the very opposite of it, accepting it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this wonderful book, for your work, for being with us this evening. It's been wonderful. Thank you all.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.